You want to play hardball with water rights. Fine. Let's see how your luxury lakefront resort survives when the lake becomes a cracked wasteland. I'm standing right now beside a rusted iron valve built by my great-grandfather in 1924 that controls every drop flowing into Willow Ridge Lake. The same lake, Victoria Harlow, our pristine little HOA queen, built her multi-million-dollar empire around. 3 hours ago, while I was holding my daughter's hand during her chemo infusion, they sent bulldozers to level the last piece of my family's legacy. Called it an emergency demolition. They didn't even knock. That barn wasn't just wood and nails, it was the soul of 4 generations. And now it's rubble. They think I'm just a grieving father, but they've forgotten one thing. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind there is. The smell hit first diesel fumes, sawdust, and something else. Something that broke me. I pulled into the driveway with Emma slumped in the passenger seat, her pale cheek pressed to the window. Chemo drugs draining her strength. And there it was. A yellow excavator parked like a smug vulture. Behind it, a splintered mess of timber and shattered time. Where my great-grandfather's barn had stood just this morning. My legs buckled. I dropped to my knees in the gravel, unable to breathe. That barn wasn't just historic. It was sacred. Every summer of my childhood lived in that place. My father's voice, his stories, his scent on the old wood. Gone. Daddy. Where's Great-Grandpa's barn? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, but it stabbed deeper than any wrecking ball. I couldn't answer, because I already knew this wasn't an accident. This was a message. I stared at the wreckage, my fists clenched in the gravel. The barn was gone, but my failure was louder than the silence around it. That place. It wasn't just lumber and dust. It was the last promise I'd made to Emma. During every hospital visit, we'd talk about it, restoring it together, sanding down the beams, adding solar panels, turning it into her art studio. A symbol of hope. Now, all that remained were broken boards and memories. Splinters of a future we had carefully imagined, reduced to kindling. Emma stepped toward the rubble barefoot on the grass, her bald head gleaming in the afternoon light. She picked up a scorched plank and whispered, "Great-Grandpa would be mad, wouldn't he?" I couldn't lie. "He built this for us," she said, "and they just threw it away." That's when something inside me cracked. Grief turned sharp. Purpose was born. Marcus Betty Chen came rushing across the street, silver hair flying like a battle flag. She'd lived here since before the HOA was invented, knew every root rock and dirty secret. She clutched her phone like it held the truth itself. "I saw them," she panted. "Last week, Victoria Harlow, some architect, and a man with a tablet. Surveying your land." They were pointing at the barn, laughing. She showed me the photos. Victoria, immaculate as ever heels in the dirt, smiling like she already owned my soul. Behind Betty, neighbors peeked from porches, some horrified, some hiding, some already choosing sides. I stared down at the image on her screen. Victoria Harlow. That name rang like a gunshot in my head. She wasn't just HOA president. She was the one who signed the demolition notice. And in that moment I realized she didn't make a mistake. She drew first blood. The manila envelope felt heavier than paper should. The demolition crew had left it on my porch like a parting insult. Stamped with bold red emergency action notice. I tore it open with Emma standing beside me, silent, eyes wide. Inside, legalese soaked in lies. Multiple failed attempts to notify homeowner. Community safety hazard. Risk of structural collapse. All dated for today while I'd been holding my daughter's hand through her infusion. I had proof I wasn't home. Parking receipts, nurse logins. They'd waited, watched, timed it perfectly to strike while I couldn't fight back. "Daddy? Did they even take pictures first?" Emma held up her phone. She was already documenting everything: debris machines, license plates. Even through chemo fatigue, my girl had more fight in her than most grown men. She knew what this was. Not an accident, not bureaucracy. This was war, and they fired the first shot. Emma didn't say much, but her silence thundered louder than my rage. She moved through the ruins, slowly, methodically snapping pictures like a crime scene investigator. She knelt beside a splintered beam, her small fingers tracing something etched into the wood. W.S. 1924. My great-grandfather's initials. That beam had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, 3 generations of storms. But not Victoria Harlow. Emma looked up at me, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. They wanted it gone, didn't they? On purpose. I nodded. She stood, legs shaking. Chemo weary, but proud. Then we don't let them win. I felt something shift. The grief I'd carried like a stone. Cracked. Not gone, but now it had edges, a shape, a purpose. Emma placed the carved timber in my hands like a relic. Not just history, a reason. Victoria didn't just bulldoze a barn. She awakened a legacy. By sunset, the neighborhood felt wrong, too quiet, too watched. From my porch, I saw shutters twitch blind sway. Not one neighbor crossed the street. Not one offered a word. Even Mr. Kim, who used to wave every morning, turned and closed his garage mid-step. I wasn't the grieving dad anymore. I was something else now. A disturbance. A liability. Betty brought over sweet tea and a warning. I heard from the mailman Victoria's already spun a story. She said you refused inspections, that the barn was about to collapse on children. She's painting you unstable, dangerous. I didn't flinch. I'd seen this before. Control through whispers. Dominate the narrative, then crush dissent. Betty's hand trembled as she passed me her phone. Photos of Victoria smiling beside 2 men in tailored suits. They weren't from the city. They were developers, and they weren't looking at the barn. They were measuring my land. The next morning he showed up. Khaki vest, clipboard in hand, sunglasses too dark for the overcast sky. He didn't knock. Just stood at the edge of my property scribbling notes, pretending not to see me watching from the porch. I walked out slow, Emma's sketchbook still in my hand, heart already thudding. "Can I help you?" He didn't look up. Routine assessment. Structural safety follow-up. For a building you already demolished. He paused, smiled slightly like a man humoring a child, and flipped a page on his clipboard. No comment. I stepped closer. "You work for the HOA." No comment. I noticed the van parked behind him. No logo, no plates, just dark windows, idling engine. He turned to leave, but not before saying softly, "Sometimes it's better to let go, Mr. Sullivan, for the kids' sake." He didn't wait for an answer, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a warning. That night the house went dark. Not just a blown fuse, not a neighborhood outage. Just us. Every light, every socket dead. Even the backup battery on Emma's oxygen monitor flickered red. Panic surged through me as I rushed to her room. She was awake, sweating, breath shallow. "Daddy, it's too hot," she whispered. The AC had died, and so had the silence. Outside, I heard something metal scraping on pavement, then footsteps retreating fast into the woods behind our fence. By the time I got out there, they were gone. But the basement door was cracked open, and my toolbox had been moved. Whoever it was didn't steal anything. They didn't need to. The message was enough. We can reach her. Even here. Even now. I stood in the kitchen holding Emma's tiny hand as she drifted back to sleep, and I knew Victoria wasn't just trying to push me. She was trying to break me. The basement hadn't changed in decades, still smelled like pipe tobacco, old wood, and secrets. I hadn't gone down there since the funeral, but something about the power outage, the footsteps, the way they touched my tools without taking a thing, it told me they were looking for something they thought I didn't know. I had. So I started searching. and behind a stack of my college textbooks taped beneath my father's old workbench, exactly where he once said it would be, I found it. A metal lockbox, rusted shut, but heavy with memory. I broke it open with a crowbar and found documents wrapped in oiled cloth yellowed with time. Inside, a hand-drawn map dated 1924, showing every valve, every pipe, every underground artery feeding water to Willow Ridge Lake. At the bottom, in careful cursive ink, W. Sullivan, Chief Water Engineer, Willowbrook County, Water Trust. They didn't just destroy a barn. They forgot who built the lake. Beneath the map was something even more valuable, a folded contract brittle with age but sealed with the county crest ink still legible. It was a water easement agreement. My great-grandfather had signed it with the county granting the Sullivan family perpetual access and emergency control over the entire lake system. Not just rights, control. Every valve, every flow rate, every seasonal diversion. Ours. 3 landowners witnessed it. The State Water Board ratified it in 1924. One line stood out like prophecy: all authority shall pass to Sullivan heirs in perpetuity. This wasn't nostalgia. It was leverage. It was legal defense. And maybe justice. Victoria thought she destroyed a barn. She didn't know she was standing on top of a century-old law. The building was gone. But the power still alive. Still mine. I spread the documents across the kitchen table, maps, contracts, faded ink, and all. They looked like old papers, but they felt like weapons. My great-grandfather didn't just build the lake's dam system. He built something deeper, a legacy of stewardship, not control. Victoria violated it without even realizing it existed. She saw a barn. He built boundaries. She tore down wood. But under it, law. Emma shuffled in, wrapped in her blanket, her eyes heavy. She looked at the documents, then at me. "What is all this?" she asked softly. I reached for her hand, placed it gently on the map. "This is truth," I said. "Our truth. And it's stronger than anything they've got." Her fingers traced the ink lines like she understood more than I expected. And, for the first time since everything collapsed, I didn't feel helpless anymore. I felt armed. I felt ready. At dawn, I drove out to the old maintenance shed tucked behind the lake's east ridge, half swallowed by ivy, forgotten by time. Most people assumed it belonged to the county. It didn't. The door creaked open with the groan of disuse, and inside, covered in dust and spider webs, sat the valve wheel, the original water control mechanism my great-grandfather had installed by hand a century ago. It was massive iron stubborn with rust. I ran my fingers over the etched initials WS. Still here. Still ours. I didn't turn it. Not yet. But I opened the service hatch, examined the flow readings, checked the access seals, everything lined up with the map. No modern override. No digital failsafe. This system still answered to us. Back at the truck, I looked out over the lake, glittering in morning light, and whispered to myself, "She built her kingdom on our foundation." Now it was time to shake it. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet, not Tank, not Betty, not even Emma. Some truths are too powerful to speak before their time. Instead, I watched. I studied the sprinklers hissing over Victoria's prized golf lawn. I noted the timing of the resort's fountain systems, the glimmer of her infinity pool at dusk, the way everything she built relied on something she thought was hers. But it wasn't. It was mine. Each observation became a quiet rehearsal. Not vengeance, not violence, just the slow, steady application of truth. And yet, the pressure grew, not just behind the valve, but inside me. Every lie Victoria spun tightened the coil. Every condescending glance from her board, every letter slipped under my door demanding compliance, every whisper that painted me as unstable, it all collected like stormwater in a pipe, until even steel would give. And when it did, it wouldn't be a leak. It would be a flood. That night, while Emma slept curled on the couch beside her sketchbook, I set up the old tripod, angled it toward the shattered remains of the barn, and hit go live. No scripts, no filters, just truth. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I began, voice steady, hands tight in my lap, and this is what remains of my great-grandfather's legacy. Behind me, the debris glowed in porch light, a silhouette of history destroyed. I told them everything. The bulldozers, the forged notice, the timing, how they waited until I was at my daughter's chemo appointment, how the barn had stood for nearly a century until Victoria Harlow needed more lakefront. I held up the original water rights documents for the camera. Then I looked directly into the lens and said, they thought I was just one man with nothing. But what they forgot is what a man becomes when you take everything away. I didn't expect anyone to watch, maybe a few neighbors, maybe Tank if he wasn't on shift. But within 10 minutes the view count doubled, then tripled. By the time I finished, there were hundreds. Betty shared the stream. Tank reposted it with the caption, "Truth from the Dirt." And then others followed, people I hadn't spoken to in weeks, people who had stayed behind curtains and fences while the bulldozers rolled. Now they were commenting. Now they were remembering. Photos of the barn from years past flooded the feed weddings, harvest parties, community potlucks. It wasn't just my memory they'd tried to bury, it was ours. Emma stirred beside me, opened one eye and whispered, "Is it working?" I looked at the screen. Faces, hearts, fire, emojis. Names I thought were gone. "Yes," I said, my voice catching. "It's starting." One voice doesn't build a movement, but it can start the echo. The knock came the next morning. Polite, soft, rehearsed. Victoria Harlow stood on my porch in a crisp cream blazer, holding a bouquet of lilies like we were neighbors, not combatants. She smiled like nothing had happened. "I heard about your daughter," she said gently, stepping inside uninvited. "I'd like to help." She sat in my father's chair like she owned it and slid a folder across the table. Inside was a check $750,000 and a drafted purchase agreement. "Sell us the property. We'll expedite your daughter's insurance approval. You'll be free of stress debt, all of it." My throat closed. "You're holding Emma's life hostage," I said, trying to stay calm. She didn't blink. "I'm offering peace, Marcus, for your family, for the community." But her smile said something else. It said, "You're alone. You're surrounded. And I always win." That was her mistake, thinking I still had anything left to lose. I stared at the check, its clean corporate weight pressed against the table like a silent threat. Victoria leaned in, voice velvet smooth. "I've already spoken to your insurance case manager, a personal friend. She's very concerned about your situation, about Emma's long-term care. Stability matters to insurers, Marcus." She tapped the paper lightly. "Selling shows responsibility, compliance, community trust." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because beneath the polish and rehearsed compassion I saw the truth. This wasn't an offer, it was blackmail. She wasn't trying to help Emma, she was weaponizing her. Victoria stood brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "Think it over," she said, walking to the door, "but don't wait too long. Approval windows can be delicate." She smiled again, wider this time, sharper, and in that moment I knew Victoria didn't see my daughter as a child. She saw her as leverage, and that made everything personal. He showed up the next morning. A black SUV parked across the street, windows tinted so dark they swallowed sunlight. The engine ran idle for hours, no movement, no words, just presence. At first, I thought it might be coincidence. But then, Emma whispered, "That's the same car from the hospital garage." I checked the mirrors twice that day. He was always there. At night, a second car appeared, different model. Same stare. Motion sensor lights flicked on around 2 a.m., but when I opened the door there was only silence and the distant hum of tires disappearing down the hill. No vandalism, no threats, just eyes. Watching. Waiting. I filed a report. The officer looked tired, said they'd look into it. I could hear what he didn't say. You made yourself a problem. Now you've got attention. I closed the curtains, locked every door, and realized this wasn't intimidation anymore. It was surveillance. It happened just after midnight. Emma's monitor let out a sharp, high-pitched beep, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. I ran to her room. She was pale, soaked in sweat, gasping. The backup battery had failed. The main power was on, but her outlet was dead. Only her outlet. I ripped the cord from the wall and ran a line from the kitchen, praying I wasn't too late. Her chest rose. Slowly. Then again. She blinked at me, confused lips trembling. Daddy! Was that me? No, baby! I lied, brushing damp curls from her forehead. It's the house. It's old. But the truth was already burning behind my eyes. This wasn't a glitch. It was precision. Someone had isolated the circuit, chosen her room. They hadn't touched her, not yet, but they wanted me to know they could, and now sleep was no longer an option. By morning, I wasn't just exhausted, I was transformed. There's a line every parent fears the moment when danger stops being theoretical and brushes the edge of their child's life. Last night they crossed it. I called Tank, told him everything, the wires, the SUV, the look in Emma's eyes when she couldn't breathe. He didn't hesitate. I'm coming over, he said. We're done playing defense. An hour later, Betty showed up with a folder in her hand and fury in her voice. I started digging, she said, slapping it on the table. Victoria's resort business is losing money. Publicly, she's filing losses. Privately, she's remodeling every cabin, paid in cash. I opened the folder. Receipts, photos, anonymous tips, and one note scribbled in sharp red ink. Emergency lake access plan, Sullivan lot required by June. This wasn't greed anymore. It was desperation, and desperate people always make mistakes. Big ones. That afternoon, Tank returned, this time with someone new. Jennifer Hayes, a local accountant with nerves of steel and a folder thicker than Betty's. She spoke calmly, each word like a scalpel. Victoria's resort is a shell. She's laundering funds through community improvement initiatives, filing fake maintenance contracts, and this is the part that matters, donated $50,000 to Blue Cross's Regional Health Resilience Fund. I stared at her, confused. Jennifer nodded grimly. That fund is tied directly to the office managing Emma's claim. Silence dropped between us like a gavel. Victoria didn't just know someone in insurance. She owned the hand that held Emma's lifeline. Tank exhaled slowly. She's been pulling strings on both ends, financial pressure from one side, health manipulation on the other. My hands trembled as I held the evidence. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. And the only thing more dangerous than her power was what I'd do with this truth. The community center was packed. Folding chairs squeaked beneath nervous bodies, and the air buzzed with something sharp, anticipation maybe, or the weight of secrets about to shatter. Victoria sat at the front of the room, flanked by two board members who looked everywhere but at her. She wore white, of course. Innocence by wardrobe. Emma sat beside me in her wheelchair, her head wrapped in a purple scarf, her small hand gripping mine with quiet steel. When they opened the floor, I stood folder in hand, voice steady. I didn't raise my tone. I raised the truth. I laid out the timeline, the illegal demolition, the forged notice, the surveillance, the tampered electricity. Then I opened the final document, the original water rights contract from 1924, still legal, still binding. Gasps echoed. But I wasn't done, because what I said next wasn't for Victoria. It was for every eye finally watching. I held up my hand, then turned to the commissioner. There's someone here who deserves the floor more than I do. Emma's fingers trembled as she tapped play on the tablet resting in her lap. The room went still. Her voice, soft but unwavering, filled the space. My name is Emma Sullivan. I'm 12. I have leukemia. And I was supposed to get a transplant weeks ago. But something happened. Someone powerful didn't want my dad to keep our land, and now? We can't get help. She paused. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I miss our barn. I miss when people were kind. I miss not being scared. Gasps broke the room. One woman began to cry. I watched Victoria's face freeze, her mask, slipping eyes no longer in control. Because nothing exposes cruelty faster than a child's truth. And in that moment we were no longer alone. We were undeniable. For a full 10 seconds after Emma's recording ended, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that makes people decide who they really are. Then someone clapped. A single, sharp clap from the back row, then another and another. Within moments the room erupted, voices rising, murmurs turning to outrage. "How could you? She's just a child. This is sick." Victoria stood, her face locked in a corporate smile that cracked at the edges. "She's manipulating you," she said. Voice taut. "This father, he's unstable. I raised the flash drive. Want to hear your calls with the insurance board, or maybe the one where you referred to Emma's illness as a strategic opportunity." Gasps. One of her own board members stood up and walked out. Her voice rose shrill, defensive, but it was too late. Because when you lose the room, you lose the war, and Victoria had just lost everything but her name. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stepped forward, opened the folder, and placed the original 1924 water rights contract on the table. This isn't a threat. It's a declaration. I turned toward the commissioners, toward the neighbors who once looked away and now couldn't blink. My great-grandfather built the system that feeds this lake. He didn't do it for profit. He did it for the people who lived here. And legally, that system and its emergency authority belongs to his heirs. I looked at Victoria. Her face had gone pale. So, tonight, I'm exercising that right. I held up a photo, the valve, the access gate, the legal clause circled in red. As of now, water flow to Willow Ridge Resort is suspended until a full federal audit clears all parties of misconduct. I didn't shout, I just turned to leave. Because some power isn't loud, it's lawful, and it's final. By sunrise, the lake was already retreating. In 12 hours, Victoria's pristine infinity pool had dropped 2 feet, exposing the algae-lined tiles beneath its illusion of perfection. The resort lawns curled brown under the morning sun, their sprinkler heads sputtering in dry clicks like metal throats gasping for mercy. Guests dragged wheeled suitcases across gravel drives. Voices raised, refunds demanded. The koi pond behind the spa had turned to mud. Local news vans pulled in before noon, cameras aimed not at me, but at Victoria's empire, unraveling in real time. She stood on the clubhouse balcony, phone pressed to her ear, barking orders no one seemed eager to follow. And I watched from the edge of the lake, Emma beside me in her hoodie, a cup of tea warming her small hands. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because for the first time since the demolition, the silence was hers. Within 48 hours, the headlines shifted from whispers to sirens. HOA president under federal investigation. Insurance interference allegations. Rock resort developer. The EPA arrived, first inspectors and windbreakers tracing unauthorized pipes, snapping photos marking violations in red chalk like crime scenes on concrete. Next came the state attorney general's office, armed with subpoenas, tax audits, and a list of donations that didn't match her public filings. Victoria tried to hold press conferences, but no one came. Investors vanished. Her lawyers stopped answering. And the HOA board, once her inner circle, voted unanimously to suspend her. Emma's insurance approval was fast-tracked within a day. A voice message from Blue Cross didn't apologize, but it didn't need to. She had her transplant date. She had her shot. I stood in the hospital corridor as Emma grinned through tired eyes and said, "Guess the lake remembered who built it, huh?" And I nodded. Because now so did everyone else. 6 weeks later, Emma came home. Her hair had just begun to grow back soft red curls that caught sunlight like memory, and her smile, though still tired, had strength behind it. Tank hosted a backyard barbecue the day she returned, and one by one the neighbors came. Not just to eat, but to stand beside us. Betty brought lemon pie and blueprints drafts for the new William Sullivan Community Center to be built where the barn once stood. The vote had been unanimous. Not out of pity, out of purpose. Because legacy once threatened had become a rallying point. Kids played by the lake's edge. Former strangers shared stories they thought no one remembered. I stood at the grill watching Emma hand her watercolor painting to the architect's sunrise over water and the outline of a new building rising from its reflection. Some homes are rebuilt with hammers. Ours was rebuilt with truth. This story, our story, isn't just about water rights or a barn or even the lake. It's about what we choose to protect when no one else will. It's about the quiet strength of family legacy, the fire that lights inside you when someone threatens what matters most, and how even the smallest voice can echo louder than power when it speaks with truth. Victoria Harlow had lawyers' money and titles. But we had something stronger. Ruth's memory and the will to stand up. And if you've ever had to fight for your family, your home, your dignity, then maybe you know exactly what I mean. Let this be a reminder: the most dangerous person in any room is the one with nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share your story below. Because courage shared multiplies.